34. Roll call. Commissioner Swift. Commissioner Orlando here. Commissioner Jenkins. Commissioner Miriam. And Commissioner Phelps here. So, for the agenda, is there any modification, any changes? If not, we'll vote to approve the agenda as is. So can I have a motion to approve?
I move.
Second. Any comments? All right, all in favor? Aye. The agenda for Monday, October 2nd is approved. Have everyone read the July 10th minutes?
Yes. And I have several corrections to make.
All right, take it away.
Okay, every single solitary meeting, it says that I'm absent.
You were.
I wasn't onto every meeting.
Oh, every meeting.
Every meeting.
Oh.
No, these minutes are just from,
You know, as you go through, you see that every time my name is mentioned, I'm not there.
Well, were you here for the July 10th meeting?
No, that one I was missing. I didn't miss.
Okay, so these are the minutes for just that meeting.
Okay, well, that's all right if it's just this meeting, but
Okay.
I should have marked the sheets that I was on. I'll find it later. Yeah, everything is I think it's absent. January on. Or maybe I misconstrued it.
if I can make a comment, these minutes are just for July 10th.
Right.
July 10th, I was absent.
Correct.
Okay. So, do you have any changes or modifications to the July 10th meeting minutes? Commissioner Swift? All right. I'd like a motion to approve the July 10th meeting minutes as written.
I'll make a motion that they be passed as written.
Okay.
I'll second.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, public communications. We have it open to the public to talk for 3 minutes on any topic not on the agenda. Do we have anyone who'd like to talk about something?
Good morning.
Good morning.
There, I think it's on now. Thank you. My name's Becky Steinbrenner. I'm a resident of Aptos, and I want to bring to your attention some work that is going on in Santa Cruz on a building on Mission Plaza that is the, as I understand it, the oldest wooden frame building in the state. It's on 109 Silvar. That building is has had excavation dug around the bottom to raise it up. There are artifacts strewn everywhere on the surface of the soil. I looked into the permit for it, and I didn't see any notation about requiring archaeological oversight, which worries me. And the permit was granted for adding on a 2-story structure to the back of this very incredible historic structure. It was the home of the first alcalde of the area, and it's being modified grossly. I know that's within the city of Santa Cruz, but I would appreciate it if you look into it. I would also like to ask again that and I'm happy that Ms. Williams is here. I would like to look into ask that you advocate for the changing in the wording of the code that describes partial demolition for historic structures. That was the description used for the house on Valencia Street, 8057, and the description of the work intended was partial demolition with an addition of 20 square feet. That building is completely gone. It was a complete demolition. There's absolutely nothing left, and there was absolutely nothing salvaged. And I think that's a real travesty. It was the oldest building left in the Heen subdivision. And I would like to request that as a matter of process and procedure, that your group must meet at the site of any building, historic building, that is being asked to be demolished or partial demolition. But I would like the wording changed for the description of partial demolition to more realistically reflect what that means and what can happen, and that your group meet on site for any scheduled demolitions before they are approved. Thank you.
It looks like it.
Yeah, so that's on.
Is there anyone else that would like to discuss, bring something to the commission's attention? All right, then agenda number 5, consent items, we have none. Public hearing items, number 6, we have none, so moving on to new business. So new business, first, we're going to set our meeting dates for next year. And Annie sent out 4 dates following the schedule that we set up last year, which is the first Monday of the month. So since we're meeting now in October, the next one would be in January, then April, July, and October again. So has the commission looked over these dates? Is there any reason why these dates aren't good, why we should vote them in for our schedule next year?
So it'll be November or December, you said?
No, now we're looking at 2018.
January.
Yes. So January 8th.
I definitely need it. I'll just write it down. January 8th.
8th, April 2nd, July 2nd, and October 1st.
You know, I was wondering, is there some way we could get notification that a meeting's coming up, like a week ahead or 2 weeks ahead, or, you know, because I plan, you know, I actually use the electronic device now to keep my calendar, and I haven't quite got it, and so it's not always there, and if I know in September that one is in October.
Would it be possible to maybe move back the notification to maybe 2 weeks before the meeting?
Yes, I can certainly do that.
That would be helpful. And if we, you know, could ever, having the minutes ahead of time too is sometimes really good because, you know, they arrive.
So the minutes from the last meeting?
Yeah.
Sent out a couple weeks ahead?
Yeah, a couple of weeks or a week. Anything that, because everything seems to come in a big, like 2 days before the meeting, and it's kind of hard to read everything and catch up and respond.
So
it'd be good if we got stuff a week ahead, a full week ahead. That would be much more. It would be easier for me.
all right, so right now we're going to make a motion to approve these dates, commission meeting dates for 2018, with a request that if at all possible, the commission receive the minutes of the last meeting approximately 2 weeks before the upcoming meeting. Okay? Because I know the agenda can be moving around.
Yeah.
We've all had experience with that, with agendas. So, I guess that's the motion. Who wants to second?
I'll second it.
All right, Alberta has seconded. Is there any comments on this meeting schedule?
Thank you, Becky Steinbrenner. I really applaud Commissioner Swift's request that you get the material at least a week in advance. Sometimes it's a lot of material to review, and I think it's valuable to have the time to look at things carefully, maybe do some other research, and come to these meetings where very critical decisions are made, and that you've had proper time to review the material and think about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, all in favor? Aye. All right, 7B, staff oral report on roles and duties and the 2-year work plan for the planning department.
Yes, we have Wanda Williams here today, the Assistant Planning Director, and she's going to provide an overview of the Planning Department work plan.
Well, welcome, and
Thank you.
for me, I'm glad to finally put a face to the name that I see on correspondence and things.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So the planning director has another appointment this morning that she had to attend, so she asked me to step in and provide you a brief overview regarding some of the, I think you're right. Thanks. To provide a brief overview regarding some of the major projects and initiatives that were presented to the Board of Supervisors in June as part of our 2-year work program and planning effort. So just to go through a couple of the major initiatives or programs, one of the programs that we've been working on for the past 2 years is a code modernization program, which looks at updating and clarifying and streamlining a lot of our code provisions. We have a very complicated code regarding various land use, historic, environmental, and building issues. And so we've undertaken an effort to try and clarify and provide some more relevant code provisions. So as indicated, that's been going on for, I believe, about 2 years. And we are blending that into a sustainable Santa Cruz effort that was undertaken approximately 18 months ago by the planning department, led by the policy section, looking at linking transportation with housing and land use issues to try and generate additional jobs that are nearby employment sectors, as well as relating housing to jobs, so that employees are able to commute or live nearby employment sectors. So those two efforts are moving forward, as well as a climate action program that's been undertaken by the department to look at trying to address wave and other climate change run-up issues. We're working very closely with the California Coastal Commission and environmental groups to try and create a very clear and coherent climate plan. Another effort that has been undertaken in response to state legislation is an accessory dwelling unit program. An ordinance was adopted, I believe, in February by the board, and now we are developing guidelines and some implementation programs to try and generate additional housing, which is much needed in this county, and to try and do that quickly, but in a very sane and logical manner, so that we don't create an unreasonable amount of vehicles or other transportation impacts, as well as other environmental impacts. And then we're also working on a Pleasure Point design guideline program that Annie is a key part of in trying to come up with some thoughtful design mechanisms and guidelines for the Pleasure Point district. I will mention also that a cannabis ordinance is winding its way through the environmental process now. I believe that ends, the environmental process ends, I believe, at the end of October. And at that point, we will attempt to get something to the board and to the planning commission to begin looking at cannabis manufacturing and dispensary and grow areas, proposed grow areas for the county. We're working with the sheriff's office, the county administrative office, as well as various other departments and community groups to try and create a cannabis program that doesn't create unreasonable or excessive impacts for residents. So those are just some of the major initiatives that were presented in June to the board that are ongoing and will take probably another 2 to 3 years to wind down. At the same time, we're working on a number of other major programs, such as looking at the Cemex reuse site, looking at storm water changes and storm event, the winter storm event impact, trying to work with homeowners for emergency repairs of their structures as well as some commercial structures, and also looking at the Mount Herman project, and we're looking at a major car dealership at SoCal and 41st Avenue. Those are some of the other major programs that we are developing environmental impact reports and other technical reports for at this time. So our staff is very busy at this point. And having said that, we are hoping that come June, we can go back to the board, reassess what we are completing, working on, and then look at whether or not we can take on additional assignments or initiatives. However, as indicated at this point, we're pretty busy with this 2-year program, and the board is holding our feet to the fire to try and complete many of these initiatives in the 2-year time frame. So having said that, I don't know, Annie, if you wanted to add anything regarding your role.
I'm involved in a number of these projects, as Wanda mentioned, the Pleasure Point project, as well as code modernization and the sustainability update. So, as Wanda said, that limits my time, and most of my time is being devoted to these initiatives. So it does, limit the ability of my time available to the commission to work on new initiatives that we've been evaluating, such as the Mills Act or new ordinances. But as Wanda mentioned, in June we may be able to kind of look at the progress we've made and whether there might be staff time available for additional historic research.
Thank you. We appreciate the information on what you're working on as our liaison to the planning department and all the different areas within it, and other projects that also demand your time. So, because we don't want you to get spread too thin. So thank you very much for that information. Do either one of you have any questions of Annie?
Somebody mentioned you mentioned a car dealership somewhere?
Yes.
Where was that?
That was at that is proposed for the corner of 41st Avenue and SoCal.
41st and SoCal.
Yes, and there's an environmental impact report that is being undertaken for that project as well.
I also just so you guys know, I'm a little hard of hearing, and I really have a hard time with whatever the setup is you have.
I will try and speak directly.
You know what? I just realized the mics weren't turned all the way up. So
That's a lot better.
So it wasn't you.
My hearing aids are on, and I just really missed every other word.
okay, my apologies.
That's all right. Thank you. I'm glad I said something.
So if that's that, then we'll go on to number 7C, the historic Aptos Creek Bridge.
May I comment on the staff report, please?
Certainly.
Thank you, Becky Steinbrenner. I'm glad, Ms. Williams, that you brought up the cannabis issue, because in that draft EIR, it lists any structure 50 years or older must be evaluated by a historic planner. And I don't know how you're going to do all that. And I don't know how that's going to be, what criteria would be used to evaluate if a structure has historic significance. And I know that your group has also talked about updating the historic stock within the county, what is considered historic. And so I wonder, there's a house in SoCal, the Millsap house that was built in 1890. The Millsaps were very prominent in SoCal's history. Their son received many national awards for his artwork, and yet SoCal Creek Water District was told by the county the house is of no significance, and they plan to demolish it any day now. So I have concerns about those things, and I know your time is very limited, but at the same time, I think we want to give due diligence to and full consideration to things that could have historic and cultural significance in our community and to save them. I also want to bring, and I'm sure you know about this and you too, the governor signed into law some housing bills that are going to shove through a lot of things, quickening the environmental process, reducing, thank you, reducing the amount of public notice perhaps, and if some cities do not build at the rates which AMBAG dictates, they will be penalized $10,000 a unit for not building that much. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to create room for these new units if this does get upheld, and I'm worried about the historic and cultural resources being quickly bulldozed to make room for these new developments in an effort to not get penalized and to stay within the state mandates. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, if I could. Yeah, Bruce Tanner. I just wanted to comment about the Sustainable Santa Cruz Plan and the Climate Action Plan. I know the county is conforming to the mandates of state legislation regarding global warming / climate change, etc. But I hope you're paying attention to all of the information that is showing that all of the climate models that have been used for projecting what we might experience in this century are now being contradicted by evidence that is being presented in the mainstream media, including evidence in the recent NASA report on sea level. Of course, you probably know that the sea level has been rising throughout the 20th century at approximately 3 millimeters a year, and this has been steady and has not accelerated. But in the most recent NASA report, they actually buried the statistics in the report, but the last 2 years indicate that the sea level has actually descended worldwide. And that is most likely because there's massive amounts of ice being deposited in Antarctica. The sea level coverage is 40% above its averages over the last decades. And it's estimated that something on the order of 3 billion metric tons of ice are being deposited on the continent itself. So it seems like the sea level rise is not occurring at this time. Also, we have an extremely quiescent sun. In the recent solar maximum, it was the lowest solar maximum in recent recorded history. And what this means is that the solar magnetic field has reduced, which means that more cosmic rays are coming into the solar system, and cosmic rays are now proven to increase the amount of precipitation and to increase low-level clouds, low-altitude clouds, which cool the planet. And we're going into a solar minimum, and a group of international scientists working mostly out of the UK have now demonstrated that they have a understanding of magnetic convection currents in the sun, which, going back in the historical record, their estimates of the effects of this have proven 97% accurate. And going forward, they're predicting extremely quiescent solar cycles at least through the middle of the century. And the implications of this is that the planet is actually going to be cooling, not warming. And I hope Santa Cruz County is paying attention to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to comment on any of the information given to us by Ms. Williams from the Planning Department? All right. The next item is 7C, the Aptos Creek Bridge. So the commission has seen the bridge inspection report, and that was dated in September 2015, and it was signed off on April 4th, 2016. I just would like to report that I did call Public Works last Thursday, September 28th, and I asked a few questions. So I asked when the last inspection was done, and as we have the report here, September 1st, but the bridge is currently undergoing an inspection right now. I asked about what scouring was, what they were doing, which was listed under Caltrans as the work they were doing. They said that scouring is when water washes away the dirt around cement piers. That 3 years ago they had done some repairs to the Aptos Bridge due to this scouring, and the current inspection was continuing on one of the northern piers due to winter rains. I asked who was doing the inspection and who would do the work. I was told that Caltrans is currently doing the inspection. It sounded like it would be going on for like another week. They were kind of in the middle of it. And if Caltrans determined that there was repair work that needed to be done, they would be coordinating with Public Works, who would be doing the work. And I asked about the overall condition of the bridge, and I was told that there was no concern as to the current stability or safety of the bridge. Caltrans and Public Works felt it was capable of handling all traffic, including heavy equipment and trucks, with no deteriorating of the bridge structure. And that's the end of my report. Does the commissioners have any questions?
Well, I just wanted to compliment you for doing that, because reading this inspection report, I was looking for a summary or something. I mean, is it in good shape or not? And reading this, it just didn't tell me really what was happening and what condition it's in. And you went and found out. I appreciate that.
I hope that I'll be able to have a much fuller overall support as we continue working on the subject of whether to add historic bridges to our inventory or not, the ones that we do not already have listed. Since this was an information-only topic, is there any comments?
Thank you, Becky Steinbruner. I'm glad you're discussing this. I remember Chairman Phillips, you did give a report on criteria for historic bridges. So I remember you were going to give us more information that you were going to investigate further from Caltrans. And I want to thank you for calling Department of Public Works to get a more recent report. I am also aware that Caltrans is doing their routine every 2-year report inspection. I didn't know it was happening now. I thought it had already been done. As a person who lives there and travels over that bridge daily, I have observed an increase in cracking in the sidewalls of the bridge, and I have observed that those cracks seem to be becoming more significant with time. I have also observed that there is ivy climbing up almost all of the concrete piers, supports, and coming up over the wall. Ivy is known to exude an acid in its tendrils that helps it cling on to concrete, and it degrades the structural integrity of concrete, especially older concrete. And that's why the Ivy League colleges actually removed the ivy from a lot of their older buildings to preserve them. So I do have a lot of concern, and again, living there and watching the loaded concrete trucks come. Some days they're coming every 10 minutes over that bridge. And in 1928, when that bridge was built, there wasn't that kind of traffic. I'm worried that with the cracking, which exposes the rebar now to oxidation, we don't know the extent of the cracking and where the water would travel down into that. And I'm concerned that with the constant vibration of the traffic in general, but especially the heavy equipment, that bridge could be thrown into a state of disrepair or even possible failure, neither of which I want. So I will be looking forward to the 2017 Caltrans Structural Engineers report, and I had seen the photos of the scouring that Department of Public Works did document. In the 2013 report, it recommended that the bridge be monitored closely during major storm events and closed if appropriate because of this very reason. So I'm glad it's getting some attention. Thank you.
Thank you.
As a 36-year resident of Altos, I'm very familiar with that area, and I'm also worried about the structural integrity of that bridge. I think you just had it outlined very clearly, the problem. And I think of this saying about look before you leap, and a stitch in time saves nine. When we see that there is a potential for the bridge possibly to collapse, we need to step back and do what can be done to prevent that. And I think putting like a weight limit on what can go over the bridge, it was certainly not designed for concrete carrying vehicles to be going every 10 minutes over that bridge. And that whole area, the trestle on the other side that has fallen away, and the bridge and all of I ride the bus regularly too, and it's like, oh, you know, there's certain places it really is scary. And I think whatever recommendations this committee can do to put a weight limit, to protect the public from potential collapse, to like physically remove the ivy, it seems like would be something that's quite feasible and easy. Anyway, those are my comments. Let's prevent harm and accidents whenever we can. This is an opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're moving on to 7D, which is our training requirements. Annie?
Under state law, the commissioners are required to complete ethics training every 2 years. I did send an email to those commissioners that are due to complete their ethics trainings by the end of the year. So please complete the training and then mail the certificate into me when the training's been completed. Thank you.
Okay. All right, 7E, a status update on the barn at the Redmond House property. And according to what we got sent, it seems the barn has already collapsed.
Yes, I do have an oral report I'd like to provide to your commission.
Please. Thank you, Annie.
Thank you. As your commission is aware, the Redmond House is included on the National Register of Historic Places. The National Register listing, which was prepared in 2004, states that the barn located in the southwest area of the property is not a contributing building and therefore does not contribute to the historic significance of the property. The nomination form noted its poor condition and the lack of information regarding its history and use. After the Redmond House was listed on the National Register in 2005, a draft archaeology report was prepared for the property by Rob Edwards at Cabrillo with help from other students, recommending that the barn be considered for inclusion as a contributing resource due to its significance in World War II era history, and stating that the basic structural framing of the main area seemed to be solid. However, in March of this year, the property owner contacted the county to inform us that the barn had collapsed due to the extensive winter rains and storm damage, and requested a permit to demolish the structure. After visiting the site, staff noted that the roof of the barn and the entire structure had collapsed. I did provide photos to your commission, and the black and white photos show the barn as it was photographed for the nomination form in 2004. And then the colored photographs show the barn after the winter storm damage this year. So staff consulted with Lucinda Woodward at the State Office of Historic Preservation, who noted that the barn would need to retain sufficient integrity to be considered for listing as a contributing resource. After its collapse, the barn has lost integrity of materials, workmanship, and design, and the barn no longer retains the physical features that would be required to convey its historic significance, and therefore it does not meet that most fundamental test of integrity. As the barn lacks integrity, it would not meet the designation criteria for listing as a historic resource in the Santa Cruz County Code or the California Register or National Register. Therefore, the existing status of the barn as a non-contributing building would remain in effect, and there is no basis for requiring further evaluation of the barn. As the demolition or removal of non-contributing structures on historic property is not subject to the historic preservation regulations in Chapter 1642 of the County Code, staff informed the property owners that the demolition of the barn would be a ministerial project and statutorily exempt from SEQ review and would not require further historic evaluation. An update on the current status. Earlier this week, I visited the Redmond House property, and the barn has continued to deteriorate further. So we requested that the building official visit the site and look at the property. He did feel, Marty Heaney is the building official, he did feel that the barn was unsafe with the potential for further damage or collapse at any time, and therefore identified the barn as a dangerous building. This is not an abatement order, it's just identifying it as dangerous so the property owner is aware. The building official did do a brief look at the Redmond House, and from this initial review, it did not appear to meet the criteria for a dangerous building, and therefore a red tag was not issued for the house. And we will have further discussion of the Redmond House at the next agenda when Commissioner Marin is available to attend, but I did want to give an update on the status of the barn today. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Does the commission have any questions?
Yeah, I have. I hope you had a chance to look at the summary or the Wikipedia information, which tells you why the barn was significant, really. Towards the end of the page under house, it starts where it discusses, and also the second page, carriage barn. It tells about how Japanese returning after World War II were given housing and actually actually put a lot of newspaper and other left materials in the barn that sort of signified their living there. So it was, the archaeological project was really pretty important. And I guess what concerns me is that we all know it fell down, but that, you know, have to get my thoughts together. We didn't get information about the fact that a permit to demolish wasn't necessary. You know, it would have been nice to know that the owner, the Tuts, were given permission to scrape the barn away without us knowing that that was happening, even though the building had fallen down. My concern, and the reason that sort of distresses me, is that I don't know what we can do to help preserve what might be in the barn. Meaning, oh yeah, the building fell down, it's dangerous, it's not historic. I mean, we could probably argue. I mean, I'm a little confused by the fact that there was a draft report written that showed this barn could be included as part of the Harrahar Redmond House historic designation, but that was in 2004. But now it's 2017, and that designation was never given. It was never included as part of the historic site. And it could have been, and it's kind of a moot point because the building fell down, right? So I think that even though we don't know what's in the barn that could help tell the story of the people that lived there, but it looks like because there was an archaeological study done, that materials might still be there that are associated with the Japanese inhabitants. And so maybe historical organizations in Watsonville or the Agricultural History Museum would like some of the boards, you know, if they found some still with newspapers or something on them that would tell the story of the people that were there. How would we get, you know, when they come to scrape it all away and take the boards?
So your question really is, or concern is that, is there any way as they start removing the walls and the roof and so on, that they can keep an eye on what's around and set those things aside?
I think when I'm trying to, it's like finding all this out at the last second. You kind of go, well, what can we do? You know, and I'm thinking, could we get the Tuts to let us know when they plan to demolish it, take the material away? Is there a way to get some kind of timeline as to how much time we would have? And then maybe we could get a subcommittee or something to maybe contact people at the Ag History Museum or PDHA and ask them, gee, would you like some of these boards? You know, if there are some that would tell a story. I mean, when I was with the museum, we got a barn door from Gorman Woody's house. And we put on it the evacuation notice for the Japanese, telling them they had to leave. And that made a statement, that old barn door. It really made that come alive.
It wasn't just a wooden door.
And it wasn't just a piece of paper. Yeah. So I'm thinking that if there's something in that building that would have that kind of statement that should be saved, it may be just a couple of boards. But if there's something we could do to facilitate that, I would be happy to work on a subcommittee with somebody.
I think what we could do is contact the the property owner and see if he's amenable to the idea of having people contact him about, you know, possible salvage of materials. and I can, if there's a subcommittee formed, I can contact whoever is leading the subcommittee and let them know the owner's response, and if he's willing, give you contact information. And
That would be good, yeah. And if, and I'm thinking that, how many people can we have in the subcommittee? 2?
that's correct.
2. So maybe it would be Ann or, my brain just, yeah.
Well, I was thinking of Susie.
Susie, yeah, Ann or Susie, that could help, find out who's interested, or how can we get these things from point A to point B, basically. It could be really useful.
Yes, I think that sounds reasonable.
Well, thanks. Good. It's a lot of paper for.
May I comment when you're ready?
I think so.
Yes, please.
The Redmond Hirahara House being on the National Register of Historic Places has been a constant worry to me because it is one of our most endangered landmarks. It is in a situation of demolition by neglect. I was hoping that when any planning went on the site, they would condition the restoration of the building, of the main building, with the approval of any development project. Also, if there's a demolition permit issued, especially for an historic building, there would be some kind of conditions for the demolition permit to do exactly what Carolyn said, or even to require that the building be put back up. I mean, they were the ones who didn't stabilize it. They were the ones who left everything in a state of dilapidation. And I'm not sure, being a National Register landmark, if there is a blanket thing for the entire property, because the statement made, even if something is not specifically designated as a historic outbuilding, isn't it all protected as a National Register property? And I don't know what the size of that property is that they designated. Does it cover the whole farm? Is everything on the farm National Register designation, or is it just around the main house? So that might be something to look into. There may be a little more muscle than you might know, having it already a National Register landmark. Thank you.
Thank you. Annie, do you have any information on what Ross was asking? I know from my experience up in the valley with the Brookdale Lodge, the original lodge is protected and part of the Brook room, but I mean, other things that they've added is not. So that's, even though it's all on the same property. But I don't know if the Redmond House is a different situation.
Yes, the nomination form specifically, one section of the nomination form is identifying contributing buildings. So the only contributing buildings identified for the Redmond House property is the Redmond House. So the other structures on the property don't have protection because they're identified as they're specifically identified as not contributing, therefore not having historic significance.
Okay. Yes. Anyone else?
Thank you. Thank you. My name's Becky Steinbrenner, and I've been working with a few people also concerned about the Redmond Hirahara House. And I think Mr. Gibson made a very good point that the current owners allowed the barn to fall down. There were probably actions they could have taken to support it and keep it at least from collapsing, but chose not to. So I think that needs to be addressed. I want to ask, is this oral report a surprise to you, commissioners? It seems like it is. Did you know this was coming? I mean, it's surprising to me to hear that it's been issued a demolition permit without your knowledge. And I would like to put a hold on that demolition permit for a number of reasons. It is a very significant building. It is where the Hirahara family allowed other Japanese American families who returned to their homes and were not as lucky as the Hirahara family was, wherein their neighbors paid the taxes and kept the house and the land intact under their name. That didn't happen everywhere. And a lot of those families came back to nothing. And the Hirahara family let them stay in that barn until they could get their feet under them. That is significant. And I think we have to do, as Mr. Gibson said, all we can do to put it back up. Why can't it be put back up? Mr. Ed Silvera did that very thing and saved the UCSC hay barn from falling down. He went in with some friends of his and they propped it up. And now it's been restored and there's even a plaque on it with his name in it. So I think we can't be so quick to rush to demolition. And I want to applaud Commissioner Swift for really bringing forth the issue of the archaeological aspects of this. If the bulldozers arrive tomorrow and scrape it all away, like what has happened in Aptos Village, there could be some very significant things lost. I would like to ask your board, your commission, to put a stop on this demolition permit. You have the power to do those things. The entire 14 acres, as well as the Redmond Hirahara house, are on the historic registry, so the land is protected as well. And Mr. Gibson made that point very well. So I would like to also let you know that I have spoken with Mr. Norman Kapornik in San Jose. He's well known for buying things to preserve them historically. He's interested. But we can't even get the Tutt family to respond. I have also spoken with and gone to visit the Emma Brush Farm Park in San Jose, and Marilyn Diamond, who is on the president of the foundation of that, is moving to Santa Cruz, and she wants to see that building saved and is willing to work to do it. So you've got people coming, you've got a lot of muscle. Please put a stop on the demolition permit for the barn. It's significant and we've got to save it, and it's possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have two eminent historians here, Ross Gibson and Becky Steinbruner. I learned a great deal just in these last few minutes, and I want to also urge a stop to the demolition. It's in your jurisdiction to do that, and I think it's incumbent upon you to preserve the historical stories, and this one particularly, that you take that action to put a halt to the demolition permit. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I guess that is a question. What is our authority?
Can I say something?
Absolutely.
I was trying, item 7E is the report from Annie. And maybe she can clarify. As I understand it, there is no demolition permit. Is that correct? They didn't need to come before us to get one, or they just didn't get one?
In the Santa Cruz County Code, in terms of historic, a review of demolition of a historic structure requires a public hearing before your commission and final approval by the Board of Supervisors. But this structure is not historic because it's identified as non-contributing on the national nomination form, and in our county code it specifically says that non-contributing buildings are not historic. So that's why it didn't come before your commission, because it's not a historic resource.
And that's where I guess I was a little alarmed, because obviously it was not historic on a technicality. You know, it was a historic structure. They found out it was a historic structure through the archaeological study. They asked that it become attached to the Redmond House as a historic structure, and that did not happen. So technically, as I understand it, then it was not a historic structure only through a technicality.
What technicality? I mean, I don't understand why it wasn't. What happened that it seems like it kind of fell through the cracks because it was the next year.
Well, 2004 to 2017 is a pretty big crack.
Well, but in 2005 they had the draft, which is 1 year after they applied.
That's right. They had a...
So when they got that, then why not in 06 or 07?
That's what I'm
saying.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I don't understand what happened that it didn't end up being listed historic. And I don't know if we'll ever know, being that it was so far back.
Well, the archaeological report recommended that it be included, but then it would have to go through evaluating the nomination form and doing the research to designate it. So it wasn't a technicality, it was the fact that process
Didn't happen.
right, because anytime you designate something, it requires a formal review and research. So that
And so why didn't that happen?
I don't know.
Andy wasn't here.
So that is the big crack between 2004 and 2017, is that something should have happened and it didn't. And so this building that should have been historic was not designated historic. Therefore, nobody needed to tell us that it was going to be torn down because they didn't have a requirement to let us know, and that's a little irritating.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's what I'm saying.
No, absolutely, and that what we're hoping is that the owners will now, through hopefully the goodness of their heart and wanting to preserve history of Watsonville, will allow any artifacts, anything from that barn to be salvaged and preserved.
Before I fall over the heart, from what I'm seeing about the Redmond Hero House, and we're not discussing that now, understanding
No.
we're going to look at that at the next meeting, right? We're going to be. The owners of the property do not seem to be overwhelmingly interested, out of the goodness of their hearts, in doing anything. And that's alarming to me, because I want to see them respond a little more, and they're not. And I don't really think they owned the property long enough, and that their priorities would have been strong enough for them to have tried to shore up the barn. I mean, they didn't own the property long enough to be responsible for the fact that it fell down. But they could, yeah, out of
Because when you look at the pictures, I mean, there's a car. They're using it as a garage. There's a car parked on there.
It's demolition by neglect. The fact that it fell down, that's what happens when something's neglected. And so now we have a case where this barn is fallen down, and the Redmond house itself, we don't know how far behind it is. But actually, going back to what I was saying, it's just nice if we could save some of the room.
Can I add a comment on what happened in the Historic Preservation Commission just last Wednesday? Because it relates to what you're going through, and they've already gone through the procedure.
Now, are you talking about the one for the city?
City Historic Preservation Commission had a hearing about somebody who wanted to remove their garage and build a two-story apartment building there, or not apartment, a new garage with an apartment over it. And they had to prove that the building was not historic on the site. And so their conclusion and the staff's conclusion was that it was not historic. But they had to come before that commission to say that. However, one of the commissioners says, well, I just went back and looked over all the Sanborn maps, and I discovered that it was there in 1905, or at least something on the exact same footprint. So the owner finally says, well, I guess it was historic, but because parts of it are old, but it's not useful anymore. They had to prove the case on something that was not listed as secondarily historic. I mean, it was not specifically listed as historic, but they had to prove the case. They had to show that what the outbuilding was, it had to come before that commission, and they had to demonstrate that it was not historic, or that it was historic, and that they had to make a decision on that.
So on the property in total, was there a historic building on the property? And
Yes, that was why.
This was
The main building was the house that was historic on Jordan Street. And then this was just a barn in the back that had been added to over the years. You could still see the original false front on it, but they said the false front didn't go with the main house, although it was typical of garages in the 1920s when it was built, or even earlier. So just to give you an idea, you may have another route that you can travel on this.
Thank you, Ross.
It has nothing to do with this, but Davenport's got the same problem. It's a building on historic, it's been declared historic, and is being allowed to be demolished through neglect. So,
Isn't
it's
that on the
interesting.
agenda somewhere?
Susie was working on that, finding out what other cities. She made a report, and there were questions, and she was going to do further research on those questions and report back at our next meeting.
It says, discuss demolition and partial demolition, including a review requirements, scope of HRC authority, and how to best describe projects involving demolition to the public. So when we get there, maybe we can talk about that.
Talk about it some more, because that is definitely an issue. So I guess at this point, since the barn has already collapsed, it isn't labeled as historic. So our only recourse is to talk to the owners and hope that they will allow, when they start removing things, that we will be able to gather any and all items that we feel would be historic to be preserved.
Shouldn't an archaeologist be on site?
I think an archaeologist has already been on site. You know,
And has said it's significant, so shouldn't there be one there if they're going to tear it down?
Well, it's already down.
Yeah, but they're going to bulldoze it.
If I'm on the subcommittee, I will let archaeologists know.
Would your commission like to make a motion regarding this item?
Could you say that again?
Thank you. This is really distressing. Thank you.
Would your commission like to make a motion regarding this item? Put into the record?
Yes.
Okay.
But I need to know how.
Okay, so you want to make a motion that we create a subcommittee,
Yes.
okay?
That we
Of two commissioners.
Well, we can only have two.
Yeah, so a subcommittee.
Of two commissioners to, well, first we need to have the county contact the Tuts and ask them to let us know what their plan is and timeline is, and so that we know when the building is likely to be
And if they'll allow.
Yeah, and in the meantime,
Yeah.
we can establish a subcommittee, and the subcommittee people can contact people in the community who might be interested, like PBHA and the Egg History Museum and the archaeologists who were involved in the first report.
So we want to make a motion to create a subcommittee to work with the planning department.
And the Tuts, and we can work with the Tuts through the planning.
And the owners of the Redmond property to salvage and preserve any artifacts that would
Related to the
to Watsonville,
Japanese in World War II and the
Watsonville history and
Yes,
so on.
exactly.
Okay.
Can I also suggest there be a requirement that demolition cannot begin unless there is a physical presence of people there? I mean, what happens if the bulldozer shows up at 7 a.m. and you've been given a timeline the night before and you don't have time to get everybody there?
So I don't.
Commissioners, I don't think that is legally permissible. This is a non-contributing structure, and therefore, under our code and under state law, the property owner has the right to come in and request a demolition permit. However, I think based upon your motion, I think we can make it very clear to the property owner that it is in their best interest to work with this commission to allow some of the materials to be salvaged from that structure. I can tell you my conversations, I had a very detailed or in-depth conversation with the building official on Friday regarding the state of this structure. He indicated that there are many members or many elements of this building that are unsalvageable because of how it collapsed and because of our winter storms that we had. He did, however, indicate that it is probably possible that some of the boards or other elements might be salvageable. He indicated it is a dangerous building, that he observed that they had, I think he did indicate a car, a lawnmower, some other yard or farming vehicles under that structure. Therefore, he wanted to ensure that residents or workers did not wander into that structure. He indicated the next step would be to go ahead and grant that demolition permit because it is a dangerous structure. However, Annie can work very quickly, I think, with the property owner to contact the property owner to find out what is their specific timeline for demoing the structure, and would they be willing to work with a subcommittee of this commission to try and come in and salvage some of the materials.
That's great.
Okay.
What about putting it out to bid? I mean, for historic structures, you have to advertise it.
It is a non-contributing structure. This is not, you can't treat this as an historical building for purposes of granting the demolition permit.
But I'm going to fight for this. This is wrong. As Commissioner Swift has repeatedly pointed out, it was recommended by the archaeologists that it be on the list. And for whatever reason, it didn't happen because of paperwork. We can't let this resource be bulldozed without anybody even trying to put it back up or save it in any semblance, just because of a paperwork error. And that's what it is. Nobody followed up. And that's not right to demolish this incredible story, an incredible piece of our history. And think of the Japanese Americans. This is a big piece of their heritage. We can't let it be bulldozed. I'm sorry. I'm going to fight for this.
I appreciate the emotion and sentiment, but we're in the middle of trying to. It's hard for me to form things in terms of let's vote on this. So you've done a good job of pulling it together, and thank you very much. But I want to stay on track because this is important, and I want to get the motion rephrased and passed.
Okay.
Can I do that?
Yes. So, were you able to put a motion together?
Motion to create a subcommittee, work with the planning department to contact the owners to determine if they're willing to have interested parties come on site to salvage materials related to the history of the Redmond House and Watsonville history.
Okay,
Okay.
good, yeah.
All right, so that is the motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay.
Who made the motion?
I made the motion. She's seconding it.
Yes. Okay, so, all in favor?
Aye.
So,
Okay, now we can go back and argue some more.
well, what I would like to propose is maybe a 10-minute break since we're at a good stopping point, because I have to go move my car. So, I don't know if you want to move your car too.
No, there was somebody down there that helped me figure the machine out.
Well, I don't know. I'm moving slowly, and I guess my car clock was off because I thought I was late, and I was leaving messages on Annie's cell and her office phone saying, I'm going to be late, I'm going to be late. And it turned out I was early.
That never happens to me.
So we're going to take a break. It is now 10:44, and we'll be back at 10:55, and we'll start again. All right, we're calling the meeting back to order at 11, I think 02. And we're now into old business A, and this is regarding the Bob Merrimack property. So, Mr. Gibson, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Miriam, I tell you.
I know.
Yes, Bob
Actually,
Merriman.
Merriman.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, I wanted to thank Annie for that excellent staff report on it. It was very helpful and really covered all the issues that we want to say, but I want to get started by talking about what an NR5 listing means. Now, the National Register standards have 6 rating categories. The first one is NR1, that means it's on the register. The second one means that it's determined to be eligible by the National Register. Number 3 means it's, may be eligible with additional research or if its integrity is restored. Number 5 means that a property is determined to have been have local significance by your board. No, 4, I mean. And number 5 is a property determined to have local historic significance but is ineligible for the National Register. And then 6 means it's ineligible based on lacking criteria and or deteriorating conditions, but it may be reevaluated periodically, and that's what we're doing because it has been listed as an NR6 at the moment, but we would like to get it up to an NR5. Now, they said in your standards that it is to aid in the nomination of a historic resource to the National Register. But this cannot apply to an NR5 because an NR5 already does not comply. You have to, if you're going to be a National Register nominee, you have to follow this set of requirements, and we'll be talking about those in a little while. But the National Register requirements do not apply. This is the place where it falls between the cracks. They do not apply to something that is of local value, but is not eligible for a National Register status. So this is what we're asking for. Now, why was the NR5 category made? It is for things important to the local community, but ineligible for NR status. It is minor and ambient structures that provide context, because you don't want to save the most glorious house in the neighborhood and then tear down the rest of the neighborhood, because you're losing its historic context. So you want to be able to have a minor category to preserve lesser buildings but that support the local context. And finally, it is an entry-level listing for unrestored or altered buildings, because on occasion you have a building you want to restore. You can't restore it at the time, but if you get it on the historic inventory, you're going to be able to eventually get around to restoring it when the property owner has money to do anything with it. It will fall under your purview. Now, just like the NR6, the NR5 structures may be reevaluated. The Live Oak History Project was a subcommittee of the County Historic Resources Commission established in 2004 to document overlooked county landmarks. We looked at about 150 properties just to gauge what we might be able to choose, and finally narrowed it down to about 46 properties in 2006 for our final consideration. And we felt that the decision not to list the Merriman House was influenced by the county's own stated redevelopment goals for the site. So instead of the various reasons that it was historic. I mean, there were so many ways that we could have designated it historic other than Bob Merriman, but Bob Merriman was the only thing that they considered as its claim to fame. And then they impeached it, saying that his career was only influenced by his Santa Cruz upbringing at that site, but that he didn't really fight the Spanish-American War while living there, so how could it be historic? Now, if this were the only reason that it was considered the building historic, then even then it should not be a reason to keep it off of the NR5 listing for a landmark of local importance only, which means that it doesn't need to comply with restrictions on becoming a state or national landmark. However, when Bob Merriman was mentioned in all of the local papers, he was always mentioned as a Santa Cruzan, even though the only place he ever lived in Santa Cruz was in this Live Oak house just on the outskirts of Santa Cruz. So they held him as one of their own. The argument was made that the County Code Section 16.42.050C states that association with an important individual is based on the National Register Criterion B. You can read that to yourselves. And in how to apply National Register criteria evaluation, the properties that pre- or post-date an individual's significant accomplishments are usually not eligible. And Circa concluded this rendered the landmark ineligible. Circa was the people who were evaluating all of our nominations for appropriate use. And it wasn't eligible if it were being proposed to be on the National Register. But it was not being proposed to be on the National Register. It was being proposed for an NR5 landmark that is of local historic value only. So if you consider this maybe the only landmark interpreting the life of Bob Merriman, recall that the National Register statement says that pre- or post-dating events are usually not eligible. This means that sometimes a birthplace or a childhood home is eligible for the National Register, as stated in the National Register Bulletin, that properties may also qualify if no properties from the person's productive years survive. So despite Circa's conclusions, the subcommittee unanimously backed the historic importance of the Merriman House and urged the Board of Supervisors to approve it as an NR5 landmark. And then secondly, Neil Coonerty said that while he feared it couldn't be listed because of Bob Merriman, because he's not a historian and he has to go by whatever Circa said, he did, however, say that he would make an effort to see that it was preserved, to interpret that history. Now, if a county supervisor would make a commitment that a non-landmark be retained for historic purposes, that means it is important for local historic significance and should have an NR5 listing. We have at least 7 reasons why the building should be listed as historic, and you have them up there on your copy of this. And 2 of them are related to Bob Merriman. So even if we got rid of the Bob Merriman Association, you would still have 5 other reasons why this would be important. The building next door, which the county also owns, is also listed as a landmark, but our building, which is more important, is not listed. So in conclusion, the County Historic Preservation Ordinance states in its prologue essentially that the county intends its landmarks to provide unique character, education, community pride, and the economic benefits of tourism. And obviously, if this were created as a landmark and became a promotable asset, it would be Bob Merriman that they would promote it as, because it is the most historic and vital feature of the landmark. So is there any questions?
Yeah. You said if it wasn't associated with Bob Merriman, it would still qualify as an NR5 for what reasons? I couldn't.
That's okay. I'll read them to you.
Oh, that will help. Thank you.
And if you look in the packet, I did have a much more extensive thing, but this is the overview.
Okay.
Number 1, it was the model of a turn of the century's trend for co-ops, because in Santa Cruz County, after the 1893 Depression, we decided to go to a co-op system so we wouldn't have a major industry going out of business and throwing a lot of people on unemployment, when in fact this would be individuals contributing to a central co-op that wouldn't have to go out of business, even if one of the people contributing to the co-op failed. Secondly, it is the first Wilson Brothers innovative ranch house subdivisions created as a suburb out of the rural farming district.
So you're talking about the subdivision and not the house, though?
The subdivision itself, this is...
yeah, but that's not the house, that's the subdivision.
It's the site on which it sits.
Okay, good.
It was an innovative idea to create a suburban farming district that, instead of having all of the farmhouses spread out, you would concentrate them together so that you had actually more of an urban streetscape, but then very deep lots in the back so that you could have a 3-acre farm. Number 3, it is associated with the county's leading chicken and flour industries. And at one time, we were the Queen City of poultry in California after Petaluma. And we had innovations that were actually adopted in Petaluma because they were so much better than what they had previously. We're also part of the flour industry. And chicken manure was used to fuel the flour industry because it warms the soil. And then it is associated with local philanthropist James Morrissey, after whom Morrissey Boulevard was laid out. He established the Santa Maria del Mar Resort and contributed to several other community improvement events. So if we replace James Morrissey with Bob Merriman, or the other way around, James Morrissey could be the person of interest that makes this important as an NR5 landmark. And then the 2 others, it was associated with Friends of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, who raised funds for the war effort. So this is the local tie-in that even though the house itself was not owned by the Merriman family at that time. They sold it in 1930, and he was in the Spanish Civil War in 35 to 37, something like that. You still had a very strong Live Oak community involved in raising funds for the event, and his wife came through Santa Cruz on several occasions raising funds for the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. And then finally the Bob Merriman Association, who became the fictitious character in Hemingway's 1940 novel about the Spanish Civil War, For Whom the Bell Tolls. A Hemingway connection is a major thing for this site. The fact that Bob Merriman was the fictionalized character. So that's 7 reasons right there. You might be able to think of some more, but if we just use 5 of those reasons, if Bob Merriman is too toxic to include, then you have 5 reasons why it should be a historic building, and that's 5 more reasons than the neighboring property, which is already on your historic rolls.
I have one question, I think, for Annie. My understanding is the county now owns this building, right? Owns the property.
That's correct.
And if I remembered in the notes that there were bids gone out to do development on, there was the several properties that this is one piece of.
Yes, this is one parcel on a site. The county issued request for proposals, and they are currently discussing the top proposal with the developer. We do have Peter Detliff here from the Economic Development Department who can answer specific questions regarding that process as well.
And there was community workshops, informational gatherings on what the community wanted to see of the property, of
Yes.
all of it.
I attended. I think basically it was when the state outlawed redevelopment agencies that the county was looking for someone they were going to precondition a redevelopment project and then sell the property to that person so that they were no longer in the redevelopment business. So that's the reason that we're in this state between county ownership and transitioning into private ownership. I gave a copy of the history to one of the potential developers, hoping that maybe he could bring back a proposal that would incorporate the house as maybe a clubhouse, or do something that interpreted the history of this site.
Because if I remember right, the options were a family-friendly gathering place, but they definitely wanted something to notate the history of Live Oak and that area specifically.
Especially since it's across the street from a school. This would be the perfect place to take school children to show them part of their local heritage that's only within walking distance.
Okay, here at the meeting, participants emphasized wanting a family-friendly gathering place, affordable housing, and locally owned businesses. It was also noted that new development should reference the history of the site in some manner. I'm a little vague or confused. So the county owns this property. They're putting it out for development, which means the development is planning to develop the entire parcel, the whole piece. So we have this house that we're considering whether it should be given historic status or not. If we feel it should be rated an NR5, does the developer build around it? I noticed one of the options was to move it, but that requires somebody different than to buy it and then to have some parcel to move it to.
Yeah, if you designate this an NR5 landmark, it's no different than the NR5 landmark they're also developing on the neighboring property. There's two properties, and they're both part of the extended parcel. It's the two ranch houses next to the Live Oak Market.
So,
that means
which
that-
property is that? I'm looking at this right here. It's a little hard to read the names.
I did an illustration. I think it's the first page of my thing, where it shows both of the properties side by side. It doesn't show the Live Oak Market, but you can understand that on the other side of these trees is the parking lot. And so it's these two parcels, clear back to the back of the pasture, that are proposed for development by the city. Now, if you make this a landmark, then that means there's two landmarks on the site, and that means that any redevelopment that happens on that site comes before you. You get to decide, based on their proposals, whether it is best for the landmarks to remain on the site in the way that they choose to incorporate them, or if you say maybe there's an interpretive park nearby, like next to the Grange or something, where it would be interpreting a farm-like setting. You have that option if it is available to you, but you need first to be the arbiter rather than the beggar at the feast. You've already seen how that works with the barn on the Redmond property. You're the beggar. You can protect anything but the barn, apparently. So you want to be the one making the decisions, or at least giving your stamp of approval to the development, that it is being done in the right way, that protects the integrity of the house.
I have some comments I'd like to make as well.
Please.
I'll provide a summary of this staff report and I'll provide a summary of the staff report and also give an overview of what it would take, the process for redesignating a site. I don't want to repeat what Mr. Gibson already stated, so the report, when the property was surveyed, Ms. McElroy, who was the consultant, evaluated the information from the Live Oak Subcommittee, as well as recommendations of the staff and the commission, and determined that the property should be rated NR6, meaning not historically significant. The Board of Supervisors and staff and the consultant also did see the research from Mr. Gibson that he presented today. And when they considered that decision, as Mr. Gibson indicated, an NR6 property may be reevaluated periodically. Initiating an amendment to add a property to the inventory requires the submittal of a historic documentation report and a DPR form prepared by a qualified historic consultant meeting the Secretary of the Interior standards, and the consultant would be required to evaluate the property to determine if it meets one or more designation criteria in the Santa Cruz County Code, and the code indicates these criteria are based upon the guidelines provided by the National Park Service. And to support the addition of a structure to the inventory, the documentation should include new research or information that the board did not consider previously in listing the property as not historically significant. And this information would need to be analyzed by a qualified historic consultant to determine if the property would now meet the significance threshold of one or more criteria. This could include, for example, determining if other properties associated with Robert Merriman exist in Santa Cruz, or their locations where he lived and worked. At this time, the required historic documentation report and DPR forms have not been submitted, or analysis documenting that the property would meet one or more criteria for listing in the Santa Cruz inventory. As noted in the staff report, the county currently owns the parcel. When a development proposal is submitted for the site, then SEQA review would be required. And this SEQA review process would provide an opportunity for county staff and the commission to carefully consider whether the project has the potential to impact historic resources and to require additional research, documentation, and analysis needed to make this determination. If appropriate, staff could require a new DPR form for the property prepared by a qualified consultant to consider any new information or research regarding the property. Your commission will be consulted during the SEQA review process so that at your time, your commission will have the opportunity to ensure that any impacts to historic resources are identified. And if any potential impacts are identified, then your commission would also be consultant to identify any appropriate mitigation measures.
Do we speak now?
Yes, you have some questions, comments?
I have, the last part that you just read, that where CEQA comes in to look at historic resources, would it look at this house even though it's not an NR5? I mean, it's not, it has no designation, so would it be looked at by CEQA?
SEQA requires that we review the project for the potential to impact significant impacts to historic resources. So if there was information, for example, if there was new research or information saying, well, look, the board designated this as an R6, but we didn't know X, Y, or Z, then part of the secret review process should look at that to say, well, we need to analyze this. Maybe we need to do more research. Maybe we need to submit new documentation and look at this. So any new information or research would certainly be looked at in the secret review process.
My position is they evaluated this only as a National Register landmark. They did not evaluate it as a local landmark that does not need to rise to the level of a national landmark. It only needs to be important to the local community.
I love that phrase, rise to the level of. I have a whole bunch of paper that I had you copy and give everybody, and I think there is some new information in there. And I agree with Ross that if it's was evaluated so that it had to rise to the level of a National Register application. If it was evaluated by one standard and as a local resource, and then at the end you come in and say it doesn't qualify because it doesn't rise to according to the national,
To the highest level.
yeah, it was compared to two different standards.
Right.
It seems like. And also, I think, because I remember this, I wasn't on the commission in 2004, but I remember the committee's work and I remember the reports. And I think there were errors in Circa's DPR form that have been identified. And I also have this material which I brought with me and has just been distributed to you, which was provided to me by Judy Steen, Joe Michaelak, which I know you know. Okay, everybody knows. And one of the things that's pointed out here is, one of the things that they provided is a complete history of the Merrimans and everywhere they lived. in Santa Cruz County. Yeah, so they found out, it says here, part 2, the Santa Cruz staff report dated September 28, 2017, states that the National Register Bulletin further notes that properties associated with an individual's formative or later years may also qualify if it can be demonstrated that a person's activities during this period were historically significant, or if no properties from the person's productive years survives. So, the last part of that statement is critical to evaluating the property's historic significance, or if no properties from the person's productive years survives. Robert Hale Merriman's productive years were when he participated in the Spanish Civil War as commander of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade from January 1937 until his death on April 2nd, 1938 at the age of 29. Merriman is prominently featured in, and then it goes on about this article. So what Judy and Joe has established is everywhere he lived. And the other document is the Merriman House chain of title. So it's everybody that ever lived in that house. And so the last part is, when the house was sold in 1973, there was still a real relative living there. In 1973.
That would be Walter and Lola Goulart.
Yeah.
Goulart, thank you.
So we have everybody that's ever lived in the house. And also, there was an error in one report saying that Merriman, Robert's father, didn't own the house. He did own the house.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was a home owned by the Merrimans. It was the Merriman family home. And since we know this is the only place left in the United States that he lived, it should qualify or be reconsidered, I think. And
the other thing to your point is that there is no place in the world that gives this history. This would be the first that interprets Merriman's history. They say incidentally that he was a professor at Berkeley or whatever it was, but you don't get it as part of a Merriman story.
Also, I'm just going to speak as a longtime Santa Cruz resident. If I asked the commission or anybody in the audience to name the most historic structure in Live Oak, what would you say?
I wouldn't know.
Ross?
The Merriman House.
Okay. Anybody else? I mean, I couldn't name the most historic structure in Live Oak that's still standing. I could mention a few that are not still.
Exactly.
But the point is that Live Oak has traditionally been a very humble community. It has not been able to rally around, doesn't have many structures to rally around. And at the time that this committee was working, they made a list of buildings they believed told the history of Live Oak. And this building was one of them. And the county consultant didn't agree, its staff didn't agree, but the Historic Resources Commission agreed. We said as a commission that we thought this building should be on the list as a NR5. And that went to the Board of Supervisors, and with a group, as I understand it, there was a batch. Is that true? A batch of structures were up for evaluation, and the Board of Supervisors read a whole bunch of DPR forms.
It seemed like we narrowed it down to about 15. So
Okay,
this
so-
will be the top 15.
Okay, top 15, and they agreed with staff because I guess, is typically what you do. You know, staff says this is what you do.
But Commissioner, can I add that when this item did go to the Board of Supervisors, Mr. Gibson's information that was presented as part of your packet and that he's discussing today was clearly provided to the Board as part of their consideration. The Board decided that they agreed with the recommendation of the consultant,
That's right.
who has an impeccable background, and agreed with staff's recommendation as well, that Mr. Merriman's residency in this structure was not during a period of his historical significance. And we still believe that. That is still staff's position. We've gone back to the consultant, although I don't think she's no longer representing this commission, and I think that that is still the position. And so I think you have the ability to make whatever recommendations that you want to the Board, but I think staff's position and the director's recommendation, if this were to go back to the Board, would still stand, that this be designated as an NR6 building.
Can I continue now?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm aware of everything you just said, because that was in the report, and where I was going was somewhere else. Okay?
Sorry.
It's hard to keep track. Well, I get interrupted and everything goes right out of my head and I can't think. Anyway, it went before the Board of Supervisors, and that was a number of years ago. So I'm trying to think of, you came today and what can we do with this? That was my goals. Where can we go from here? Is there a way to get this it's a way to keep the conversation going, is what I was going for. Is there a way to perhaps give more information to the Board of Supervisors to see if they're interested? But I know staff still has the same position, but does the Board of Supervisors, we have different supervisors. Maybe they are more interested in Port Little Live-Oak. I mean, it's...
There are other consultants, than Circa. I mean, if Circa is wedded to this position...
I'm just thinking...
I think that we can review Circa's original DPR form and analyze whether their conclusion is the correct one. They concluded what they thought the County Board of Supervisors wanted, which was no encumbrances for a redevelopment project. And essentially they were telling the Board of Supervisors, yes, you have all this information from Ross Gibson, but if it has anything to do with Bob Merriman, that means that you have to disregard that information. So they have disregarded the information because Bob Merriman cannot be historic, according to them. I tried to outline in this paper that there's please, get it out.
I think this is a valuable discussion, and I would like to see the commission do something to further this investigation without trying to push a conclusion at the moment.
If I may make a suggestion? In order to, I think, for the commission, to my mind, have a basis for recommending that a property be reevaluated, it should be based on new information, new research, and ideally provided and presented by a qualified historic consultant. So I do think that the SEQA review process would be an opportunity to continue that conversation and to do a more detailed analysis and review by someone who's qualified to do that analysis, and at that time to make an informed, decision and recommendation about the property.
Okay. I just want to add one little thing. This information that I got from Judy Steen, Joe Michael, has the argument that this property could be reconsidered because it is the only extant building. associated with Robert Merriman. So that is one thing that could be new and looked at by a qualified consultant. And just as a little side note, at one point, Judy Steen and myself and the former State Historic Preservation Officer applied to be the county consultant, and we were chosen. So she's qualified, just to mention that. Last of all, and I do agree that the CEQA study looking at the building could be an asset. Has anyone thought of proposing, when the new development looks at history of the site, naming it after Robert Merriman?
As we noted at the community meetings, sorry, I'm drawing a blank. I was named Norm Potemkin. Pointevin, thank you. Did a presentation, and the board definitely heard there were comments like we would like to acknowledge the history of the site. So I think that there would be different ways that could be done, such as naming the site, or maybe interpretive material that could be considered during that process.
Okay. My concern with this is if there's a way that we can keep the door open for possibly looking at reevaluating it. And so if you're saying that the CEQA hearings would be a way to do that, that's good for me. But I don't see any other.
I apologize that this is a very political process, simply because after we were denied our designation, I tried to get it on the county blue plaque inventory, which has absolutely no restrictions to development of the site. It is only honorary. It is only to name something that the county regards as valuable. And since the county was the person who owned the property, they would not let us give it a blue plaque. So they are resistant to any idea of this being considered historic. I think the fact that some of the developers were open to it at the meeting might be the best thing, because like you were saying, to name the site, of course I don't want to see another circumstance where we tear down the Cooper House and then name the new building the Cooper House.
I had a couple of questions. I just wanted to clarify what was said. In here it says that the environmental review of the site using CEQA. Now, there was asked that because it wasn't listed as a historic site, would it be included? Or will CEQA be looking at all the properties so it would get a CEQA review?
The CEQA review process would make analysis as to whether the development project has the potential to impact historic resources. So if there were information which indicated that the DPR form listing it as an NR6 was missing information that could change the designation, or there were errors, then that would certainly be looked at as part of the CEQA review.
They're right. New information is available that was not included in the DPR form because it was only evaluated as Bob Merriman's house. It was not evaluated as any of the other elements that I tried to propose. So that is the new information. And also, the Andreas house, which is right next door to it and is on your historic inventory, I would recommend you examine what made that historic. Why is that on the inventory at all? I mean, it sits next door to the Merriman house. This was something the county obviously rendered historic, so look at how they got that historic and see if you can duplicate those efforts.
That was along the lines of what I was thinking. So Carolyn, So adding, as Ross presented, adding the other points as it being part of the beginning of the backyard industries for a local co-op during the Depression, and being a first subdivision of this type of architecture and so on, adding that too. And my question is then, for the people doing the CEQA, how would they get this type of information? Because the DPR is focused, the previous DPR is focused on Bob Bierman, and it doesn't go into these other areas, I don't think.
No.
And so who would provide them that information?
Commissioners, I think if you have specific issues, historical issues that you want analyzed as part of the CEQA review process, if you want to convey that to Annie, we will make sure that it gets into the hands of the economic development staff that are overseeing this process, so that they can then convey that to the consultant.
And would the CEQA process, do they always start at the top and look at something to see if it's a National Register level qualification, or do they start there and then, if not, move down to local historic significance? Or
Do you want to answer that?
The CEQA review would look at whether the project had any potential impact historic resources. So generally, when we do CEQA review, if there is a property, for example, that's not in the inventory but it's older than 50 years old, we would consider that, whether it had the potential to be historic. So we have to consider, any potential for historic. Generally, at the CEQA review actually says, the CEQA review is based on whether it qualifies for the California Register. Is actually how CEQA is.
This isn't going to qualify for the California Register.
I guess our concern is that if they're saying, well, it doesn't at the state level, so we'll put it at 6.
I think our concern is that it might get skipped over because it's already been discussed and the Board of Supervisors already determined that it was not historical. So when CEQA comes through and is looking at impact on historic resources, are they going to look at this and say it's not historical and therefore we don't need to address it?
If there were specific information from your commission that would be part of the record saying, we think this information wasn't previously considered and it should be considered as part of the review.
So if we say we're concerned about this structure and we want it to be looked at, then it will be looked at.
I would recommend doing a new DPR form with Judy doing it.
Well,
I think she has a handle on the information and can best evaluate and then send a recommendation to through you to the county as to whether the DPR form was correct in its assessments and so forth.
Well, one of the things that it's in this DPR, I'm just looking at it, says period of significance, 1916 dash. So the building wasn't in existence in 1916, I don't believe, was it?
Yes. June 6th was when the James Morrissey tract was established.
So according to this, the tract was established, but was the house built?
According to
Let's see what I'm looking at. Was
Steve Benson did the chain of title that you have in your packet at the beginning of my report. So this was what his assessment was. And I got additional information from Phil Reeder.
Okay, well my information has 1918.
Okay.
So
I have.
Well, then there's a question,
Well, but also
Figure it out.
there's no end to the period of significance.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
We're in the period of significance.
Okay.
All right, so where does that leave us? I feel, Carolyn, that things keep kind of shifting over to you, but I agree if a DPR, a new DPR was to be written up, with some of this other information and given to you, would that be passed on to the CEQA for CEQA review versus going back to the old DPR?
If a new DPR were prepared, that would become part of the record of the secret review process. So the information on that form.
And that would go to CEQA review.
So when they did the site for the developer, they did the CEQA site review and looked at the properties. There's 4 properties. This new DPR would be part of what they would use in reviewing this particular property.
The DPR form in itself wouldn't become the official record for the property unless it went through public hearings before your commission and then adopted by the board. But in terms of being part of the review process and record for the property, it would become part of that record.
Yeah, don't pin your hopes on the CEQA review. I mean, that may turn out in your favor, but get the process started for a DPR form to find out if things are correct the way they are and proceed from there.
Is that something you're willing to?
My brain is trying to comprehend a real DPR from kind of a faux DPR that would be given to, what would it take to get a real one? I mean,
You just hire Judy or whoever you want and ask her to review how the other DPR form was done, and are the conclusions in that one correct, that it should only be an NR6 building. And if you come back with an NR5, then you have a public hearing and you...
I somehow don't think it's quite that simple. Is it? To get it.
Well, you want your DPR reviewed. That's where the question comes in.
I could have a report done that looks like a DPR that would be added to the property's record, and it would probably sit adjacent to the original DPR. Is that correct? Or not?
The DPR is just a research. It doesn't have any official
Yeah, you have to be
status.
proactive on this. I'm sorry, I didn't mean...
It doesn't have any official status until it goes through, the county code specifies a public hearing process for that, so it doesn't have any, it's not the official record until it goes through public hearings before your commission and the board and is adopted by the board.
And if the DPR then comes up with that it recommends it be an NR5, and it goes through us and we review it, and it goes to the Board of Supervisors and they read it and approve it, then its ranking is changed. Would that officially change it?
The public hearing would require review by staff. We would also have it be reviewed by we hope to have a consultant on staff before the end of the year, so it would be reviewed by the county's historic consultant as well. And typically, the process of generally, the board would give direction to the commission to initiate a review of a property, so I don't know that it's ever been done in this manner.
Yeah, and this is my first time going through this process.
Would it be good for us to get a report at our next meeting on how we should proceed to do that? I mean, because it sounds like it's usually not done this way, and
Actually, let me give you an example of when you've gone through a similar situation. In 2004, when you established or when this board established the Live Oak History Committee, one of their goals was to reevaluate all NR6s as required by the county historic preservation rules. reevaluate them to see if any of them can be upgraded to an NR5. So that was the process that they went through in 2004.
So they reevaluated, decided
They reevaluated, and you're just focused on one reevaluation right now.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's what I was saying, a whole batch.
So this is what you can do. This is certainly within your powers to do it. It has precedent in your group.
Well, I
Commissioners, could I add, you certainly do have the right to initiate it, a DPR at your level, but as Annie indicated, typically the board would initiate an action for historical review. And so you could go before the board during the 3-minute discussion, open discussion, or you could approach an individual member to bring this up at the board to initiate that process. Let me add also, the process for designating, going through this whole process of going from NR6 to NR5, it's not a 2 or 3 month process. We're probably looking at, what do you think, about a 9 to 12 month process to complete the review, the analysis, to look at how we came to the conclusion that it initially was an NR6 property and why now a consultant or perhaps staff would want it designated as NR5. So having said that, that's not going to be an overnight process. You may go before the board.
So we should start at the Board of Supervisors and get their direction.
Yes.
To review this.
If you want to make a recommendation, that's where you would start. Go before the board, make a recommendation that this process be initiated again. And then it would be up to the board as to whether or not they would want to initiate it once again. Keeping in mind, as I've indicated, the board's already reviewed all of the materials to date and made a decision that it should be an NR6. So you're asking the board to completely throw out all of the information that they considered previously, to disregard a technical consultant's recommendation that was considered before, to disregard staff's thorough analysis and recommendation that was provided previously, and to start this process all over. Perhaps a quicker or better process might be to, as part of the CEQA environmental review process for whatever project comes out on this site, which would probably be an EIR or mitigating negative declaration, to convey to your staff, to historical staff, what it is that you would like to see analyzed or evaluated as part of the historical review, CEQA review. And that can be given to economic development staff, who can then share that with the environmental consultant to look at and to analyze whether or not there is any merit in anything that's being asked for. And then Annie can always report that back to you once that additional analysis is conducted. So that's perhaps a quicker way to get there.
Well, how do we feel about this process?
I would just like to have everything you just said in writing, because it just went right through my head. It's like, I have to, I want to.
So I guess
That's
I'm
a good
saying,
idea.
maybe let the CEQA process go ahead and play out, rather than go back to square one. Let's follow the process that has been established for this project. There's been an RFP that was distributed. Once a consultant is selected, they will be required to complete the environmental review process. As part of that environmental review process, they will need to go down and look at whether or not there are any historical resources or significance associated with this property. But in addition to that, staff would give to them some issues that we would perhaps want them to look at as part of that historical significance or review that they could analyze or look at as part of their review.
So we could provide, or write up or condense some of this additional information that we feel is additional.
Yes,
To provide them.
yes,
So if we, prepared, these are the issues that we.
yes, that you are concerned about. Now, that does not guarantee that they will not rule out all of those issues or some of them, but at least it gives them a place to begin with to look at this site in terms of the historical context. Does that make sense, Annie?
Yeah, I think that.
So how do we feel about that? Does that give us a,
I'll buy that.
okay. So how do we want to get this information together since,
Well, I think we have it. I think it's all here. A lot of it, a description of it. Robert Marion, why he's significant. And maybe if we had it so that it was in a format that looked like a DPR.
well, I was just thinking somewhere where it was not in different pieces, but somehow all together summarized by, under categories. And unfortunately, we can't get together like a team and put it together.
Well, we can see. I can talk to Judy and see if we could get something that looked like a DPR and statement. Talk to Ross. A statement of a clear statement of why people want
And bring up
to
some of
preserve,
these.
why Live Oak wants to preserve it, or does Live Oak want to preserve it, why it should be looked at and considered.
And some of these other supporting facts beyond Mr. Merriman that
Yes.
that adds more foundation and support to the historic.
Yeah.
To historic.
I think you may also want to focus on information that's new that wasn't previously considered by the board if you're...
So do we need to make a motion here on something, or we're just agreeing to do this?
Is there public comment?
Oh, yes.
You can make a motion if you like.
All right. So is there a motion to put together the new information in a concise summary to give to the planning department for the CEQA review of, is there a name for this project? On the Merriman property for the Live Oak redevelopment project that we're looking at.
Could you read that again? New information.
A motion.
A concise summary.
A concise summary of the new information supporting recognizing historic significance on the Merriman property for the CEQA review of this development.
That's the purpose.
All right, so we have a motion. Any comments?
Yes, thank you. My name's Becky Steinbruner, and I'm actually really appalled with planning staff here this morning. I get the distinct feeling that planning staff wants to make sure that the development goes through. And what it is we're talking about a lot of money for the county. And that's what has driven it in the past, and that's what I feel is driving it now. I don't think naming a place in honor of something is a form of preservation at all. In Watsonville, there is Ohlone Parkway, and there is Target, and all of that big shopping center. That does not reflect anything of the Ohlone. Naming Merriman and a huge development will not reflect the true significance of this structure in the land. I want to know who is the historic consultant that you want to bring on staff. There are good ones, and there are some that really are going to march to whatever the county wants and the developers want. And I want somebody that's going to be there to support historic preservation and stand up for the people and what is important for our cultural and historic heritage. I want to know who that is and how that person is going to be chosen. I also have absolutely no confidence in the CEQA process at all because I've seen it fall flat so many times. I've seen it come up with a negative declaration and it's just all thrown out the window. I've seen a mitigated negative declaration, but the mitigations never get followed up or monitored or reported or available to the public. So I have absolutely no confidence at all in the CEQA process in this county. Honestly, I don't. I've seen it too many times. I would like to ask, rather than do a completely new DPR, if asking for a peer review of the existing DPR would have the same level of acceptability and status for the consideration in a CEQA report. Simply having something as part of the record doesn't mean anything here, not in this county. I've seen it. It's part of the record, but it's put in the box, and it's not considered. It really isn't, and I'm going to be honest, it isn't. So I've seen some of Circa's information, and you've said yourself there were errors in it. So it is perfect grounds to have it peer reviewed. And the information that Mr. Gibson has given you here this morning is significant and needs to be considered thoroughly, not just with a wave of the hand and a political push from behind the scenes for the economic preservation of the area, not the historic preservation. And we have someone here from economic development, by the way. He's been sitting in the back, so you can ask him questions. He's probably really mad at me for pointing him out. But he's from the economic development, and I don't think even though Barbara Mason has told me that she's got a background in historic preservation and respects that, I think you've got to be really diligent here, and the public has got to be really diligent. What would it take? Would a petition signed by 500 people make a difference? We've got to work to save our heritage here. It's being bulldozed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marilyn Garrett, 36-year resident of Aptos, and someone who has attended Board of Supervisors meetings, zoning administration, various meetings of the county quite regularly since I retired from teaching in 2000. I have the same assessment that Becky Steinbrunner expressed from my own observations. The CEQA review, we often hear negative declaration. I've heard this all the time regarding radiation emitting, environmentally destructive cell towers. They just check a box and the evidence is otherwise. We have to look at the evidence here. In this case, the local, what I'm understanding is the local historical significance of this Merriman house. And I hope you take under careful consideration redesignating this, and also who is the consultant is key, and whose interests the consultant recommends. And what I see as a whole pattern, and beyond this county as well, is big development, big corporate interests dominate any local placement of significance on the quality of life, and prioritizing that, and prioritizing the rights of the people and the rights to protect our environment. The corporate interests represented by big developers, LLC, limited liability corporation, overpowers everything. And I think we have to put the brakes on it. I'm very thankful and impressed by the research here and the work of Ross Gibson and also Becky Steinbrunner. And I want to commend you as commissioners for having this item on the agenda and really having like a full disclosure discussion of the implications of this. And I would suggest that you, Carolyn Swift or Ross Gibson, be the consultant for this type of local historic preservation. I would trust either of you, but I do not feel that I have any trust in what's taken place in the interests of big development and against historic preservation. Thanks.
Thank you.
I have one question for staff. Government-owned property is often categorically exempt from CEQA process. Would that be the case for this, since it is government-owned?
No.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So we have a motion, we need to take a vote.
Okay.
So we have a motion and we, unfortunately, we did not second it before I opened it up. So we need a second.
I'll second it.
Okay. So all in favor? Aye.
Could you restate the motion?
Annie, could you please?
Yes, the commission will put together new information consisting of a concise summary recognizing the historic significance of the property and provide to the planning department for seeker review.
Okay. So we'll be moving on to under old business number 8B. Review and prioritize commission goals as provided in our January 23rd, 2017 minutes. Number 1, discuss inviting speaker to provide training to the HRC and the public on a topic of interest to the commission.
Yes, so I would be interested in hearing suggestions from your commission on topics, and then I do plan to invite qualified architects or historic consultants to give a talk to the commission. This would be a public meeting. The public would also be invited to attend. Would be.
Well, I know one topic we talked about was architecture.
Yeah, but now I think I want to hear some more about CEQA.
Yeah.
It's hard to keep up with.
So topics is local architecture and more on CEQA.
CEQA as it pertains to historic resources. I meant.
Exactly.
Yes. That would be the topic.
That would be good.
Well, do you have any other?
We were thinking about, we had, I don't know if Ross was there, but Leslie Dill gave this great talk once at the Santa Cruz City Historic Preservation Commission meeting, and I just still think finding somebody like her would be.
Yeah, her
Yes,
name has come up.
Yeah, I did make a note of that last time. So certainly, if it's architecture as a topic, then she would be a good person to invite.
I would appreciate hearing that again because it was really good.
Okay.
Okay, so I think at this point those two topics, and then so we wouldn't hear back though until our January meeting, right?
No, I will schedule a meeting as a certified local government. This would be the annual training for the commission, so I will schedule a meeting and.
Sometime before the end of the year?
Correct, yes.
Okay. All right then, number 2, discussion of cleaning up the inventory, identifying buildings whose condition may have changed since the last inventory update and to correct information in the inventory.
So yeah, the general heading of this is review and prioritize commission goals. I would like to recommend that items 2 for cleanup of the inventory and item 3, which is discuss demolition and partial demolition, including review of code requirements, scope of the commission authority, and how best to describe projects involving demolition to the public. This is not a discussion of demolition by neglect ordinances, but it's a review of our existing code requirements for demolition.
I misread that, yeah.
Yeah, that these be included on the next agenda of the commission.
So 2 and 3 be moved to the January agenda?
Right,
Okay.
I actually really would like the discussion of demolition, partial demolition, soon.
Yes, January is our next meeting, believe it or not.
But if we're prioritizing commission goals, I was just saying, I would like that to be a priority.
Okay.
High priority?
High priority.
High priority. Now, in doing that, would you be the one then doing the explanation, or would there be another planning department person who would be here and go through it and answer questions? I don't know how specialized the planning department is with their personnel.
Well, I am, as you know, the historic resources planner, but when you mention that, it does occur to me that in addition to the review for historic, there's also, it might be interesting to have someone from the building department or maybe the building official come and he can also talk about what the process for demolition or what they look at for red tags and that sort of thing.
And that's what I was thinking. What are the criterias, and are there different, I guess, levels or that? I think if we had a better understanding of some of that, when it's, because I think we all have buildings in our areas that, as we've discussed, are there. The owners aren't really doing much, and there are concerns. And then at the next meeting, maybe Susie will be back and she can continue her reporting.
Yes, we could certainly add that. I think that would be
Okay.
useful.
May I make a request? Is it possible to get anyone from the State Historic Preservation here? I know there are people with good training that work there that are watching our county and probably would very much welcome the opportunity to come speak with you and put on a training. And they're government employees, so it shouldn't cost. I think it would be a terrific opportunity for us all to learn. Becky Steinbrenner, thank you.
Isn't the state historic preservation office, they hold workshops that we usually go to every once in a while.
That's correct.
It would be much more difficult for us to have one person come here than for us to go to one of their trainings.
Yeah, I think typically, I don't know if they have, enough time to come to individual counties. They have been, we went to one of their trainings, but they do put on trainings within certain regions of the state for local governments too.
But there's been like joint efforts. I know Capitola did one, and they had somebody.
Where if someone did come, if we had a big enough group.
Yeah, it was Capitola did it, and we all went, and we got credit for going to a training, and it was, I don't know if it was open to the public. I think it was. So. I don't know how, I think we've discussed this before.
There was a cost because there's a registration fee.
Well, I think that the problem was that it would be, as we discussed it, my memory is good, but it would be too much of a burden to ask Annie to do that kind of organization now. Mm-hmm. But that would be something to have on a longer term list of things we'd like to do, because that is a very good opportunity. People come from like Monterey and San Jose, and I think it might be a little difficult for us to host it by ourselves.
For future trainings,
Something future.
Yeah, but if we could join together with, Monterey, have them host it. They've got all the history, that's what they say.
And I think you have a lot of interested people in the public that would also be willing to volunteer their time. And I do want to impress upon you that the State Historic Commission staff is quite concerned about what they're seeing going on in this county, and I think would welcome an opportunity to come here and support historic preservation. Thank you.
Okay, and then the next item was our watch list. Continuing work on our watch list, which I heard you've been very busy, Carolyn.
My watch list? Oh, well, I did go through my section of the inventory and pulled out, just a comment, and I brought a copy so that you could see what I did, so we could find out if that's the kind of...
Yeah, no, to have a kind of a format.
Yeah, but if that's the kind of commentary we were thinking of having, and that's...
Yeah, no, I like that.
On the watch list, I went to Seacliff and looked at some stuff, but...
No, that's great. But this is your copy, right?
Oh, you can have it.
Oh, okay. That'd be
I have a
great.
computer.
Well, I was thinking one for each of us,
Yeah, no, I just brought
so we
one.
could look. No, thank you. Thank you so much. So, any comments that you want to add to that?
Regarding the watch list?
Yes.
When commissioners have additional properties that they're recommending, then, I'm keeping a record of that, and we can also review that again at the next meeting if your commission.
Okay, so where Carolyn put together hers like this.
That was actually related to cleaning up of the inventory.
Yes, so this would be the kind of thing then that she would send to you? Or would you want each individual property sent as a separate document? I'm thinking, for me.
Why don't we discuss that at the next meeting?
Okay, so just hang on to it for now.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And then the next item, 8C, is staff goals. Report back on staff goals of the year.
So the county is working on hiring a historic consultant. And we do expect to have a new consultant in place within the next 2 months who can assist with reviews of complex projects, reviews of secret review process, and other work.
When has the county hired?
Well, we're in the process of hiring a historic consultant to assist staff with reviews and of complex projects, secret review, and that sort of work.
At one of our meetings next year, could we have the consultant come and introduce themselves?
Yes, I think that would be an excellent idea.
All right. We're down now to number 9, where the commissioners make any presentations or...
A question about 8C?
8C, the watch list?
No, staff goals.
Oh, certainly.
Thank you. Thank you for making sure the county has an historic consultant on staff. What is the process that's being followed for that recruitment?
Annie? Says,
The county has a process that we follow for consultants, including a list of questions that we send out, and then that would be followed by additional interviews, which we'll be scheduling soon, and then the county would select the top consultant from that list.
And how's it being advertised?
Say what?
I wonder how this position is being advertised. Is it just locally? Is it nationally? Is there a consultant that has been hired? I see that often done by the county when there's a position of such importance. They hire a consultant to do the recruiting and to bring in people. And so I just want to know that it's being well publicized and that it is open to a broad array of people who would be well qualified and interested in historic preservation.
We've sent invitations out to a broad list of consultants in the county regarding the position. Excuse me, not in the county, in Northern California regarding the position.
So that was the planning department that did that?
Yes.
In Commissioners Ed, we follow the county's purchasing process. So it's completely at arm's length for our department, where we turn it over to a purchaser or a purchaser, I can't think of his title, but someone that manages actual contracts. And so they would then send out notices or begin to identify potential consultants or determine whether or not it would be newspaper noticing, the internet, or other means to solicit invitations for this contract.
Okay. And is the list of questions put out in that bid or call for people? Is that public information?
You'd have to check with the purchasing department regarding
The purchasing department?
Yeah,
Okay.
you check with Annie after today's
Okay.
meeting.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I have another question. I know that the commission doesn't have a say in who's hired, but is there a way to, is there any kind of questioning of consultants to see how well they understand Santa Cruz County? I always worry about somebody coming from, Stockton or something, that really they don't live here and they don't really know, and they apply standards that would, be suitable in downtown San Francisco.
I'm timing myself. We do, the list of questions that were prepared did include, what's your experience with Santa Cruz? So that would certainly be something that we would factor in when making a decision. We also want to, make sure that we select a consultant that's well qualified as well.
Yeah, but I think about compatibility with the commission, and I hope there's some attention paid to somebody that gets along with us.
Well, that respects you. That's what you want, is respect.
no, that's a good question, because Santa Cruz is a seaside tourist, but also college town, and we're very different from a high metropolitan area. And having someone that that understands that and our type of culture and history here.
It's kind of like it goes back to Live Oak, a little community of Live Oak, and buildings not rising to the level of historic significance. If you understand the community, then you understand what might be significant differently, perhaps.
So before we go on to number 9, which is the commissioners basically talking about whatever they have personally been involved in that they want to share, is there anything last from the public?
Thank you. I didn't think I'd get a chance.
One more time.
I really want to make sure that this new commissioner, this new historic consultant respects you people. Because maybe you're not qualified archaeologists with all of the paper that the Board of Supervisors wants to see and staff says has to happen to be considered. But you people live here and you care. And you respect what is here and want to preserve it. And what that consultant needs to do is respect you and the importance that you bring to the board and your recommendations, and that the board listens to you. That's what matters. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, number 9, commissioner presentations.
Let her do it first. I need someone to do example for me.
Well, that's what you've been telling us about Davenport, what you've been doing up there.
Oh, okay. What I've been doing, I'm attending all of the meetings on the rail trail, all of the meetings that have to do with the restoration of the cement plant, and anything that pertains to Costa Rica Land Company. So,
Davenport's getting
that
very
is
busy.
keeping me busy. What?
I said, and that's really getting busy up there.
Yes, it's getting very, very busy up there. And I'm politically speaking, people are really, really passionate. And if you know what it's like to attend a board meeting that's passionate, that's it.
Carolyn.
Well, let's see, what would I comment on? Oh, I wanted to mention that, we always look for buildings that have been well restored. You don't see them very often, and I think I had notified Annie about the building in Seacliff next to Manuel's, on that strip. What's the name of that street? I can't think of it. But anyway, near Manuel's restaurant, there's the oldest building in Seacliff. And I've seen it in aerial photographs, and you look at it and you go, that's the first one. And because there's nothing else there. And here's this building, and I thought, I look at it, and I went around, I took pictures of it one time, and I said, this is just a great old 1930-something building. And then as soon as I love a building, it's going to be knocked down or altered. And I saw, it was being gutted, and I was really worried about it. And I watched it, and then I heard John Hipple from the Aptos Chamber. He was watching it too, and they did a really good job. And it's all fixed. And, good. Yeah, you look at it now and you think, whew, it's like it's good. And we don't get to see that very often, but it's nice to notice, and the owner just did a good job.
The owner cares.
With the eyebrows above the windows? The eyebrows above the windows.
I don't know. It's a pizza place. I know it's part of it, but anyway, it's a 2-story building, and it's the oldest one on the whole block.
Yeah, I worked with the building official to make sure that they took some attention to the windows on that building.
Yeah, well, they did a good job. It looks like it's all there.
That's all. Great. I have nothing to comment on, but I did have a question talking about old buildings. I was wondering when the owner of the Brookdale Lodge would be coming back. I saw in our little local paper he's targeting November to open, and he's looking at the next phase, which is the Brook Room. But I know he's also been doing some work across the highway with the cabins. And I think Barbara was here like beginning of last year, giving us a report on the Brookdale Lodge. So I was just wondering, if there was, going to be any need for him to come back now getting into the next phase, or has everything dealing with the historic part of the property is done, and we won't be hearing anything more about it?
When they do move to the next phase, especially if they're going to be doing any work on the historic lodge or other historic buildings, that would definitely be coming before your commission. And I can check with the planner who's sort of overseeing the whole project to find out when their next phase, when that will be happening. And certainly, that will be coming to your commission if they're proposing any changes to that historic
Because the
building.
last thing we dealt with were the windows. Remember, they were taking away a window, I think.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Yes, that's right.
in front of the bar part. So I believe that concludes our meeting.
No, wait, I have another question.
Ooh,
Just came up.
just popped in your head.
You were talking about old buildings. My question is, when a building is, what's the word? Demolished for reconstruction, is there do we watch to see when reconstruction happens? I mean, so they said they get permission to take down a building and they're supposed to reconstruct it exactly as it was or whatever the plan is. And the property sits there and there's no building. Is there a time length that goes by before somebody says, hey, where's the new building?
Once a permit has been issued, there are time limits they're supposed to follow. I don't, is this regarding the Valencia Street, the house on Valencia Street, or just generally?
Say that again.
Is this regarding the house on Valencia Street, or just generally?
That's what I was thinking of.
Okay, yeah, I can check and report back to you at the next meeting. I don't remember the exact dates in terms of when they
I was just
applied for their
curious.
permit, but.
I go to Caroline's thrift shop a lot, and I walk around the corner, and
Right.
it's not there yet.
Right.
So, I just appreciate it.
Okay.
All right, then the October 2nd, 2017 meeting of the Historic Resources Commission is now adjourned at 12:37
The next meeting will be January 8th.
at 9:30.